Hey guys, it's Lemming Rush. Today I'm going to be giving you my top 5 tips to avoid sucking in heavy tanks. So for the first tip, I'd like to suggest that you don't be afraid to scout in your heavy tanks. A lot of people feel that heavy tanks shouldn't be scouting. Scouting is delegated only for light tanks and so on and so forth. What I've found is that light tanks aren't actually very good scouts in the current meta. What happens is light tanks are able to get eyes on people who are driving into position, but if they want to get long-term eyes on people who are simply standing still, that's impossible because light tanks tend to get focused on by arty, they get YOLO'd and so on and so forth. Heavy tanks are actually some of the best scouts in the game. What you can see I'm doing here is I'm in my VK7201K. I took a look at the enemy team lineup and realized that they'd have a huge amount of campers sitting on the one line. And given that we didn't really have a one-line scout, I thought I'd go do that. And the reason I'm going to be able to do this is because I'm in a heavy tank. A light tank in this position would get YOLO'd, they get focused by arty and so on and so forth. And you're going to find that if you play this role, you're actually going to win a lot of games. What's going to happen here is I'm playing this ridge that I found. I don't normally come here in heavy tanks, so I was giving this a try. And what's going to happen is I'm going to be in such a heavily armored vehicle that the enemy is going to be intimidated by my vehicle, and most of them aren't going to YOLO me. Now, occasionally you will get YOLO'd, and that's when heavy tanks are able to deal with it. You know, if you're in a light tank, a lot more people will YOLO you because you're not able to deal with getting YOLO'd. So this E75 is rushing into me. Because I'm in a tier 10 heavy on full HP, now I'm down 400 HP, I'm going to be able to deal with this. As opposed to if I were in a light tank, there's no way I would be winning against an E75, and the E75 would certainly have support because it's a lot easier to push into a tier 8 light as opposed to a tier 10 heavy. One really good technique for scouting in your heavy tanks is to always be maximizing the amount of pressure that you put on the enemy team. Obviously, you don't want to get yourself killed, but in this instance, all the enemies have disappeared, and so I decide to move up. The Centurion 1 dies. That allows me to spot the STRV, which allows me to actually get 5,000 spotting damage for this game. Now, one thing to understand is that this type of play is actually good for your win rate because pushing sides is how you win games in World of Tanks. If you want to be able to win a game, you have to win at least one side of the map, and so by being very, very aggressive down a flank, spotting for your teammates, even though that's not the traditional role of heavy tanks, is actually going to win you more games as opposed to relying on a light tank to do it. Now, the next thing I'd like to suggest is when you're playing corners, only use the W and S key. What I mean by that is if you're on a corner with a teammate, like I am with a 103 here, you only want to be going forwards and backwards. You don't want to be going left and right because that's how you block and get blocked by your teammates. Me just simply only using W and S is what's going to allow myself and this M103 with, you know, minor adjustments to our position to be able to shoot at this Type 4 heavy without getting in each other's way. So that's just a really quick tip. If you're on a corner and you're with other people, don't block your teammates or rub into them or do anything akin to that. And to avoid that, you can do that by simply just moving forwards and backwards. You want to make sure you give your teammates the ability to shoot at the enemy tanks because that doubles your firepower in effect, right? Like, you don't want to be blocking your teammates. So that's tip number 2. The third piece of advice that I'd like to give to heavy tank drivers is to pay attention to the height of your vehicle in relationship to the teammates that you're with. So in this clip, I'm obviously in the VK7201K. Anfield in front of me is in a Super Conqueror. Now, it's very common for people who are in German heavy tanks, which are also generally very tall, to want to take the front lines. Now, the problem with that is tall vehicles block the shots of your teammates right here. So in this clip, Anfield is playing the front lines. He's in a shorter vehicle, albeit less armored, and what's going to happen is he's going to be able to play the short angle, and I'm going to be playing the wider angle, and this is going to allow me to shoot over his shoulder. And because of the way I'm playing, I'm also able to take hits for him. He's able to back up if he wants. I'll notice it, I won't shoot him, and so on and so forth. And that allows Anfield to be able to continue to engage the enemies without blocking my shots. If this was to switch around, Anfield would have to come extremely wide to shoot at the enemy vehicles because I would be blocking his shot. His vehicle is not tall enough to shoot over mine. One thing you have to worry about if you're in like a German heavy and you're sitting behind your teammates is letting your teammates die. So right here, Anfield's kind of low on HP, I'm full on HP, and I want to push this flank. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to lead the charge. I got tracked right here. I'm trying to lead the charge and take the hits from my teammates because my teammates are lower on HP than I am. What you want to do is if you're playing slightly behind a teammate, be more than ready to lead the charge because what's going to happen is the guy who's playing the front line is going to lose their hit points before you do unless you're playing like stupidly. And it's going to be important for you to lead the charge when required because you know, the shorter, lower HP vehicle in front of you isn't going to be able to do that. So I lead the charge right here. That allows me to kill the 430. We're going to continue to push into the enemy team. That's ultimately, this type of play is ultimately what wins games on maps like this. You play intelligently, you don't block your teammates' shots, and then when you're able to, you push in, you lead the charge, use your hit points, and so on. So that's the type of play that's what I would suggest for taller heavy tanks, and shorter ones obviously should be in the front because then people can shoot over them. For my fourth tip, a lot of the times in heavy tanks, you're not actually able to predict where the enemy team is going to go. So for example, this game is on Overlord. It's a standard game. I'm in my VK, and if you take a look at the enemy team lineup, you're not actually going to be able to reasonably predict where the entire enemy team is going to go. They've got a lot of mobile heavies, and it's very reasonable to expect them to be on the 2 line, in the middle of the map, or the 0 line. So what I'd suggest you do if you're in a situation like this is I'd suggest that you actually play the middle of the map, or if you're not on Overlord, I'd suggest that you take a position on the map that allows you to flex to wherever the enemies could possibly be. Now, a lot of people don't feel comfortable about moving their super heavy tanks around the map, but the reality is that in World of Tanks, a lot of the maps are extremely small. If you just put yourself in the middle of the map, it maybe takes you about 40 seconds to get into another side of the map and start being useful. So what I'd suggest you do is, like, if you don't know where the enemy teammates are going to go, simply put yourself in the middle of the map or in a position that lets you move to the possible locations to fight enemies, and then you can make an informed decision after that. Now, for my fifth and final piece of advice, I'd like to suggest that if you're going to get flanked, you push forwards. It's very common for aggressive heavy tank players to find themselves getting flanked by medium tanks or light tanks. So what you're going to want to do in that situation, let's pretend you're in the situation that I'm in right here, where you've got an E50M in the middle who's going to end up flanking you. You need to push into one side. So if you're flanked by an E50M, there's an E50M on your rear, and there's 2 tanks in front of you, you need to push into one of those groups, ideally whichever group you can kill the easiest, because otherwise you're just going to be sitting in a crossfire and there's nothing you can do about that. So what we've decided to do, Anfield and I noticed that we're about to get flanked by the 50M, so we decide to push into this M48 Patton and the Super Conqueror, and the idea here is to kill these 2 tanks before we get flanked by the E50M, which is going to keep us alive because then we won't be in a crossfire. So we push into this Super Conqueror, we get him killed, and by the time we kill this Super Conqueror, the E50M only just now starts to actually flank us, which allows us to deal with this side without a problem. So that concludes my top 5 tips for playing heavy tanks. If this video was helpful, you're welcome to give it a like and subscribe to see more of my videos. I'm also open to feedback, so give me feedback on what you thought of this type of video in the comments. As well, if you have any questions, I do read every single comment that's posted on my channel, so you're welcome to ask me questions there. And that's where we're going to end this video. I'm going to close out with a blooper, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. I made a ton of mistakes while trying to make this damn video, so here's one of them. Now, the fifth and final tip I'm going to give you isn't such a macro tip, it's going to be more of a micro tip. One thing that... oh my god. One thing that you're going to find is when you're... Jesus Christ.